But here we are today to talk about vitamin D, which has become quite unexpectedly a little bit of a lively area for debate. So actually the timing of this and the timing of what it is that we're going to discuss today couldn't be any more perfect. And in order to do this justice, we have brought in our center of all things power related with regards to vitamin D, which is our very own Marie Pedersen, who is going to, first of all, start us off by sharing some information. And really that's going to capture and present the state of play as to where we're at with regards to our formulation, our development, our considerations of vitamin D. And then following that, we're going to delve into some conversation and some chat with some questions. Thank you to all those people who sent questions in the intervening week. There was a fair few came our way. We won't be able to address them all because of time constraints, but we will endeavor to go through as many of them as we possibly can. And as Ida speaks, undoubtedly, I will have a few questions of my own. So welcome. I can still see the numbers racking up, but given the time, I'd like to welcome Ida in. I'd like to hand over to you, Ida, to take us through, and I look forward to you chatting on the other side.
Thank you very much, Colin, and thank you to all of you for your patience. This was supposed to go 1 week ago, but here we are, finally. I will start by sharing the screen with you because, first of all, we wanted to give you a short recap of the test and the formulation of Zinzino Shine. So here comes the sun, as you know, and the reason why we have explicitly focused to introduce a new vitamin D test and a product is because 1 billion people out there are vitamin D deficient. That means 1 out of 8 people on a global basis. We also know that the prevalence varies between countries and that a lot of people out there are having issues facing the recommended intake or production of vitamin D. The sunshine vitamin contributes to a lot of different bodily functions. It's involved primarily and above all our immune system, plays a key role in our immune functions. Also very important for strong and healthy bones, bone mineralization, not depleting our bones for calcium, for example. Also, it's very important for muscle, teeth. It's involved in cell division, calcium levels in the small intestine, of course, and absorption of calcium and phosphorus. Crucial for bone health, again. We also know that vitamin D status is influenced by a lot of different factors. We know that the sun is the most important source to vitamin D out there, contributing to up around maybe 80–90% of our vitamin D status. But we also know that in a lot of countries, the sun doesn't shine strong during wintertime. Also, we use these days a lot of sun screen and clothing to cover up for the most strong sunlight rays. We also know that when we grow older, we are less efficient at producing vitamin D from our skin. And there are so many other factors that I could address when we talk about vitamin D status. And I'm sure we are getting back to those risk factors also when we are answering your questions later on. But the point is that all of these factors are risk factors comprising or influencing our ability to meet our daily requirement for vitamin D. So the question really is then, knowing that 1 billion people out there are vitamin D deficient, is my status optimal? And that is why we introduced the vitamin D test. This test is a DBS test, a dry blood spot test, that will reveal your status. It reflects all 3 sources to vitamin D from the sun, from diet, and from supplements. And we are measuring 25-hydroxy vitamin D3, which is the best marker of vitamin D status out there. Compared to what you do at your doctor, it's as reliable as you do at your doctor. It's very easy, and this kind of test, this DBS test, is stable and very good for shipment globally. So that is one of the reasons why we are able to launch it everywhere. The difference from the fatty acid test, the balance test, is that here we have to make sure, that we take one big drop of blood to fill each circle. If we do that, we are able to ensure a highly accurate and valid test. Also, I just want to mention that when you have taken your test, we have developed a totally new website, a new test site for you that you see here. Here you will enter your test code, and also we have summarized everything that you will need to know about vitamin D, sources to vitamin D, why vitamin D is important, important references, literature, everything is on this test site. Also, we have of course also paid a lot of attention and energy on developing a new vitamin D report. So you get your own individual vitamin D report, which is very rare when we look at our competitors. The result is presented as a bar where you have different colors indicating your status, going from red, critically low, to critically high. Also, we have this green area in the middle, the optimal area. And you could say that if you are in the lower part of the optimal area, you will need to pay extra attention to your vitamin D status and your intake. We are also presenting the number or the result as a quantitative number, meaning that you have the exact number of your status. When we are introducing a new test, we also have to have a solution if people are deficient. So this is why we developed Zinzino. We have a lot of different products in our portfolio already contributing to vitamin D, but with Zinzino, you are able to tailorize your own intake based on what you need. Zinzino contains a vegan vitamin D3 source and 4 different sources to magnesium, making sure that we have the magnesium available and that it's absorbed and utilized, helping vitamin D into our cells and the organs where it's needed. This formulation is extremely elegant and smart, yet kind of easy. We have the vegan source and we have the broad spectrum magnesium to aid the absorption and utilization of vitamin D3, and it's all natural. No artificial or traditional excipients are used. We have no use of titanium dioxide, for example, no GMO, no soya, no gluten, and it's also been certified by the Vegan Society, this product. So we can be extremely proud of our Zinzino product. One thing about Zinzino that makes it so elegant and smart is the dose of vitamin D3. Because if you look closely, you will see that the dose of vitamin D3 is 12.5 microgram in one tablet. We chose to have a fairly small amount of vitamin D3 in each tablet because we are then able to use this product based on our needs and tailorize accordingly. So let's say that we are in the very low part of the range, insufficient in vitamin D3, then we would need to take more Zinzino tablets compared to if we are in the suboptimal range. So here we are able to use our product to adjust our status throughout the year and throughout life. We also have taken into consideration that body weight is an important factor when we talk about vitamin D3. So our official recommendation is that if you are below 80 kilos, 1 to 3 tablets a day of Zinzino is what we recommend. If you are above 80 kilo, then we say 2 to 4 tablets a day based on your status. We also have our amazing health protocol contributing to 40 micrograms of vitamin D a day. With Zinzino, you are able to mix and match and adjust your intake based on your need and the test throughout the year. So you can combine other products with Zinzino, but you just have to make sure that you know how much vitamin D you are taking and if that is what you want or what you should do based on your status. We always recommend that you retest at least after 120 days, just to make sure that you are on track. Zinzino is test-based, individualized, and personal nutrition. And us having launched this new test, and of course, Zinzino, is just another example of us taking this serious and to another level. That was what I have prepared today, but I just wanted to finish off my small presentation here before we go into the questions, saying one more time that 1 billion people out there are vitamin D deficient. That means that we have the possibility to help 1 billion people with our test and with our product. Colin.
Superb, Ida. Thank you very much for framing that up. We've had a ton of questions and there's already questions appearing in the chat. And certainly for us, really working in the product team and on the research side, I think we get more kind of challenged by the questions and more approached by the questions than perhaps anybody else, because people read a lot of information and there's a lot of information out of there. And so because of that, I'll apologize in advance, but there's a lot of misinformation and there's also a lot of misunderstanding. And, you know, often people will raise things because they've read something which seems like a really legitimate point of view, but actually it's been put through the filter of somebody else's marketing. Now, we can't do that. We're a product team, and, you know, certainly Ida, myself, Emily, you know, we are researchers. That's what we're qualified to do. And we spend our time really looking at what the evidence has to say about this. And so sometimes we get drawn into a little bit of a debate, which is evidence versus message through media. And that can be really difficult. So with an attempt to approach sensitively about this, but in an endeavor to inform and to debate this, because there are areas where Ida and I have, you know, a different interpretation of the data. We're going to delve into it. So buckle up, folks, because we don't promise to know all the answers. Some of what we say might well clash with something that you've read elsewhere else. And that's the way this is going to go. So let's start, Ida. We had a couple of questions on this, but this was something I wanted to raise anyway, because it's been brought to our attention. And this comes down to the whole why no vitamin K debate. So let me just frame that up a little bit better. We've produced a very specific targeted product for vitamin D. And we know there's a real case of need. You've just quoted some of the figures yourself, 1 billion people estimated to be in a deficiency. And there's all kinds of reports around the world with regards to the implications of this deficiency. And because of that, it's quite a saturated part of a market and everybody's looking for their way in. And for sure, we know this because we do our market analysis. A lot of products out there have vitamin K, as well as vitamin D. So, Ida, what are your thoughts with regards to our stance on what we've developed and the whole vitamin K debate?
Yeah. So where to start? We have had, of course, that discussion within the product team before we went down to the basics or the details, digging into the dose and every small necessary detail that we had to figure out. We had that discussion. And what we discussed is that, yes, it's very common that you have products with vitamin D and vitamin K, but here our aim was to launch a test, a vitamin D test, and also a vitamin D product. If we are including vitamin K in that product, we will exclude a group of people taking blood thinners, not able to take our product. Then, secondly, Yes, we know that vitamin K is involved, of course, in bone formation and bone health, but it's not necessary to have a product with vitamin K in order to absorb vitamin D.
Mm-hmm.
Thirdly, we also have vitamin K in both Extend and Extend Plus. So we already have there a product containing both vitamin D and vitamin K. And also the fourth, I would say, and maybe you could add other factors as well, Colin, but the fourth is that vitamin K deficiency is very rare among the adult population.
Mm-hmm. Perfectly summed up. And there are a couple of points I would add to that, either, if you don't mind. Mm-hmm. One is that we know the research that focuses on the need for vitamin K is concerned with high dose vitamin D administration. And typically that's in clinical terms. This is where people are taking really, consecutive high dose vitamin D. And this happens a lot, whereby the message from this area reaches the mainstream. And then people start to think, right then, if you have vitamin D, you have to have vitamin K. But it's very contextualized to a certain circumstance in that instance. And also, as you've said, is we already have an excellent product that has vitamin K and vitamin D. If I remember rightly, if you take 4 Extend, there's 60 micrograms of vitamin K. So when we came to develop a vitamin D top-up product, which was to allow people to, adjust, fine-tune their vitamin D needs, we knew there was no need to put that in. And as you've already said, this opened it up to a broader market as well, because we did cater for those people who've got more of a sensitivity around the vitamin K issue. So hopefully, folks, that kind of gives some insight on it. But I'd like to just labor the point a little bit, because this is really a complementary product, isn't it, really, either, whereby we have a range of products that contain vitamin D. And this is about individualization and the strategy to make sure that where people need to be. And so that automatically takes us into the test. And there's been a ton of questions come through about the test. So if you don't mind, either, and I know you've actually explained this in your intro, but if we could just spend a little bit more time on it. So the first question that we get a lot is, what does the test measure?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one extra thing about this discussion, and that is we have the health protocol. That is an extremely important part of our combination, who we are, and the test on top of the health protocol will determine or will reveal if you are deficient or not. Then if you come out deficient based on a different of individualized factors or lifestyle factors, then we will need to have a product that could take you from suboptimal or deficiency to optimal intake. That was like the overall aim of adding Zinzino to our portfolio.
Yeah.
Going back to what we measure is that we measure 25-hydroxy vitamin D3. That is a measurement of all the vitamin D that we have from the 3 sources in both skin production and then the dietary contribution, fatty fish, liver, eggs. There are few good sources to vitamin D, but there are some. And then the third, of course, supplements. We are measuring this marker. It's the same marker as you are measuring when you are taking your vitamin D status at your doctor. And it's a good agreement between the venipuncture assessment that you take at your doctor and what we do with the DBS. Yeah. Was that clear? You want to add something?
No, I think that's really clear. And I think what's important, because another question that follows through is, what makes our test better than anybody else's? What I'd say, first of all, is really difficult to answer that, because we don't know what other people are necessarily doing. So it's hard to say when I can't comment on what everyone else does. But what I do know is that the route we took on establishing the test with VITAS was that it would be aligned to best clinical medical practice. So that was the accuracy and the consistency of the test itself. So it was every bit as valid and insightful as what you would get if you went through a medical route in order to acquire the test. So we can only really comment on our test really with regards to how well regulated it is and how accurate it is. And then also the fact that the test is important because it offers a service that enables you again to take an assessment of your status. So this notion of that we place a lot of emphasis on is know your status. And we've talked now about what the test actually measures and why that would be useful to you. So I guess if you don't mind, Edith, if we take a step back a little bit and let's look at the context, the need for vitamin D, because I've been around a fair while and we've been trying to champion people using vitamin D throughout the late autumn and the winter months, for over 20 years. Right now, it's never been as hot a topic, and we know why. There's been things that have happened in the world that have really brought it to people's attention. So Ida, from your point of view, and this kind of goes back to your risk factor slides, where should people set their considerations over those risk factors? Because there's a lot of questions coming through about, should I be alarmed? Where should people set their considerations around those risk factors?
Well, I think that we could start by looking at the contribution from the sun. If you're living in the northern hemisphere or south, very south, not near equator, there is a very fair chance that you might not get enough vitamin D during wintertime. And you will produce vitamin D throughout summer, and you will have an adequate or maybe even good status during some of the months during fall. But then going over to January, February, March, you will be more and more depleted in your stores, because vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin, meaning that it will be stored in your body, and it's not necessary to have it every single day, although it's a good idea to do that, because you have some kind of stores around in your organs and in your body, in your liver especially. So looking at the sun, whether or not you are exposed to enough sunlight is an idea. And looking also at another risk factor, a lot of us are working a lot during the day, and the sun is the strongest between 11, maybe 2, 3 in the afternoon. And if you're not able to go out and get 20 minutes exposure to sunlight during that time without too much clothes on, without sunscreen, you're also not producing as much vitamin D perhaps as you should. So sun is one very important factor. And I would say, this is my humble opinion, but experience is that at least here in the Scandinavian countries, most people will be at risk of deficiency during wintertime. And we are recommended by the government to take a vitamin D supplement.
And that notion of risk, I think, a lot of people, and this has really been brought home to me just recently, is that people go, okay, so I've been told that vitamin D deficiency is not good. I want to make sure that I'm in an optimal range. There's government recommendations encouraging me to take it throughout this period of time. And then the reason why they should do that sometimes has a lot of kind of scare tactics around it, but just in really kind of more reasonable terms. And simply put, Ida, where does vitamin D fit in how it functions and how it supports our immune system?
I would say mainly it's involved in a lot of different functions in our body. But let's talk about the immune system first. We know that the vitamin D receptor is expressed on immune cells, and we know that whenever needed, vitamin D will be converted from its inactive form to its active form on those cells. So whenever we need vitamin D, and have it, it's a good thing. If we are not having enough vitamin D, then our immune cells are not able to exert its job as it should do. Also, we know, although it's not directly immune health, but we know having strong bones and making sure that we have a strong foundation throughout our life will reduce the risk of many diseases or conditions, softenings of bone, fractures, osteoporosis, for example. And we have to do that job once we are in our teenager years, young adults, and then also make sure that we are able to, or that we pay attention to our vitamin D intake and production throughout life. So we can't wake up one day at the age of 50 or 60, start thinking about our bones. We have to do that earlier on.
Well, I mean, the bone is often regarded as the reserve of the immune system. So, you know, this is why when there are issues around the bone, these are really serious matters. And also the kind of one of the primary functions of that engagement of the vitamin D is in the production of those essential T cells and B cells, which is a part of the body's response to a pathogen, you know, to an infection, to an issue. And so it's as simple as this, you know, think about it on these terms. If you don't have enough of what's going to create the message to create the response, then you're compromising how you can respond. That's how essential vitamin D is in this. And we struggle to achieve enough of it, certainly through our diet. And then at these times of the year, particularly Northern Hemisphere, you're not getting any of this from the sun. So your only option is to effectively supplement, and to supplement intelligently. So on that now, that takes us really kind of naturally, Ida, towards dosage, our favorite subject. And everybody has, and there's been a ton dropped in the chat. Everyone is saying, I've read that, you know, 125 nanomoles too low, and, you know, 200, and someone's saying about toxicity. We'll come back to toxicity in a moment, because that's something that's a different issue. But first of all, we know we have to be compliant with the regulations with regards to what we can advocate, and really what the research says about where those kind of optimal levels are, with a known efficacy on supporting the immune system. But give us a bit of an insight on the daily dosage and where we stand on that, really, Ida.
Yeah, so I would say that we are talking about, or we should separate what we are talking about. So at the one hand, we are talking about the dose of vitamin D3 that we should take as a supplement every day on a daily basis. And on the other side, we are talking about vitamin D status, how much vitamin D we have in our blood, and then also in our organs. There are strong regulations from countries to countries on how much vitamin D we are allowed to put into a supplement and recommend as daily dosage. It differs a little bit between countries, but in general, the upper limit for vitamin D in a daily dose is around 80 to 100 microgram a day. If you take what we have in our portfolio, the health protocol, I told you that it will contribute with 40 microgram of vitamin D. And then you can top off with, for example, Protect, contributing to 20 micrograms of vitamin D. You could add on Cynoshine as a tool for adjustment throughout the year. And there are also a little bit in Lean Shake, for example. So mixing and matching between the products we have in our portfolio is something that you can do and still be within the safe recommendations and the upper limits. When it comes to the cutoffs, when we're talking about status in the blood, there are different agencies and, for example, World Health Organization, authorities in the US, in Europe. They are differing a little bit when it comes to the hard cutoff points of what is defined as an optimal range suboptimal or low, for example. What we have done is that we have gone through all of the different recommendations that these agencies have, and we have landed on what is the accepted and general definition of the cutoffs. Although we might not be in 100% agreement with them when it comes to, maybe we could have the cutoffs a little bit higher when it comes to, for example, the optimal range. We have to do that as a company, making sure that no one out there are throwing themselves at us, trying to take us because we are saying something else than the academia and the researcher and the agencies are doing out there. So at this point, we are having these cutoffs, as you know, but it might be changes in the future once the literature and science is developing. And
informing the guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
That takes us to the notion of toxicity, which is a serious notion. But I do want to frame this because I personally, I find this really fascinating. So given the fact that we are dealing with a global deficit, and like you've said, approximately 1 billion people with a recognized vitamin D deficiency, and we've seen the consequences that has in multiple pathologies, and then people straight away start to get onto the whole kind of vitamin D toxicity. Too much is is going to be really bad for you, which it is. Too much of anything will be really, really bad. Believe me, it's actually too much oxygen is really bad for you. Too much of anything is inevitably really bad for you. But we kind of put a lot of the focus on the potential risk of that upper end, when actually the population at risk of engaging in that is far less. However, we do have to be sensitive to it, because we don't want somebody to go and be alarmed and consume too much of the vitamin D within any kind of product and put themselves at risk. So given that, I think the way to frame this really is to say, if somebody either gets a higher score, so they do the test, and let's say they're up around about 170, 200, what's the steps they should, and they shouldn't panic, what's the steps that they should take?
Yeah, first of all, I was going to say don't panic. But when you are in the upper range, of course, don't add any extra vitamin D in your diet or in supplements. That's number one. And then I would say retest after a couple of weeks, maybe a month, to see if you are at the same level. Also, there are some kind of logic to this. If you know that you have been taking so much more than you should of vitamin D, and that you are in the higher part of the status, then you should perhaps also cut down on the vitamin D sources from supplements. But if you are taking within the recommended dose, I would say do not increase and take a new test. Do you agree with me, or maybe you have another opinion, Colin?
No, I agree. I also, I do agree generally. I think also bear in mind that there will be seasonal variation. Believe it or not, people, a big part of my background is chronobiology, which is looking at time of day variation of certain physiological parameters. And we look at that across seasons as well. And we're directly in tune with the planet and the transition of light and the change in seasons, and certainly our exposure to UVB. And so it's never a case of I take this much and that means I get that response in the blood and that's it. It's dynamic. And so that retest, that kind of second consideration is essential, is to have a look and see where you're really at, and also consider how you feel. And start to consider things. When was the last time you had a cold or a flu? You'll start to look at general ways in which your health is performing, and consider that in all of the context of this as well. Because all of this is important, because there is so much individual and unique consideration when we start to look at nutrition. That's why we are advocates of personalized nutrition and test-based nutrition, because it's all about you. And taking these guidelines and seeing how you can elicit more information and apply that to you. So I think everything that you've stated there is the real kind of common sense, measured, controlled way to manage that situation and to take it in stock. And it's good practice, to check it anyway, just to see, and never assume. Check where you're at across the year. I was actually speaking to a colleague of mine just a couple of days ago who, I won't say who it is because I don't want to give anything away, but worked in sport for a long, long time, really well-informed practitioner, and said to me, I'll be all right though, won't I? Because, I'm out, we're on the pitch, we're on the field every day, and I'm all right. And I was like, it's November. It doesn't matter. It wouldn't matter if you were all running around the pitch naked. You're not getting anything from the sun. And yet this is someone who's got a really, I'd say, more advanced understanding. Never assume. If in doubt, test, assess, and adjust. And that's the way to kind of measure this as you go forward. Yeah. One of the questions we had, just staying on risk factors for a moment, because I think we've dealt with the kind of dosage and the toxicity kind of issue. And please, people, don't consume massive amounts. That's the way to make sure you don't go into that toxic range. Be tiny increments, work around it. But one of the questions we had was around pregnancy. And obviously that comes up as one of our risk factors. And the question is, I've got the question just here. It's quite a long question, so I'm going to refer to it. Which is this notion that somebody who is 29 weeks, example, into their pregnancy, and they're asking what's the best way to introduce vitamin D at that stage. And they're actually asking this, interestingly enough, in the context of this person's taking balance oil, and that their initial assessment was quite high, about 25 to 1. So at that stage, at that point in the pregnancy, introducing vitamin D, which, as we all know, certain health boards around the world now are really advocating this. What are your thoughts, Ida? Is that something that we can, I don't think it's something we can give a guideline on, but I think what would be your thoughts with like at that stage? I know what mine are, but I'd like to hear yours first.
Yeah, well, pregnancy is it's a delicate area because what we can say officially is that you have to go to your doctor and consult him whenever introducing a new supplement. And that's the best approach, also if you're having a medical condition. But taking supplements during pregnancy is usually and can be a very good idea for some certain vitamins and minerals. Vitamin D, for example, is a very good idea to make sure that you have enough during pregnancy. Also, folate during the first 3 months of pregnancy and before you plan to get pregnant is important. Iodine, for example, throughout the pregnancy, and many other vitamins and minerals. So in this case, I wouldn't be afraid to introducing Zinzino Shine in addition to balance oil. Let's say that this lady is taking between 7.5 and 12 milliliters of balance oil a day, which will contribute to between 12.5 to 20 microgram of vitamin D on a daily basis. Adding then a Zinzino Shine tablet will contribute with from 12.5 and upwards. But I would say that this person also should take the vitamin D test. Of course, because based on the test result, she will be able to adjust the daily dose of Zinzino Shine to reach what is recommended for both her and the baby.
I entirely agree. I think the key part is whenever introducing anything at that stage of pregnancy, speak your physician, your doctor, take some advice. Also, when we're pregnant, vitamin D has an essential role in some other areas based on just normal homeostasis. We've got this like new emerging area. So making sure that we're in the optimal range is important. And it's just about doing that in a very measured and in the right way. And that all starts again by getting tested for the levels of vitamin C and whether or not there's a real strong case of need. The other thing I was going to say is that one, this is a little bit case specific, and we were given very specific kind of 29 weeks. In all honesty, ideal world, you'd say, well, really, you'd want to start your strategy earlier on anyway, prior to conception and certainly in the earlier part of pregnancy. I know that's ideal world kind of thinking, but they're the kind of targets and standards we should set in place. And that's where our role as educators and communicating with people, having conversations, making them more health-centric in their mindset, is to get them to switch on to these concepts and ideas and thinking, well, when I'm bringing about such a measurable change to my biology, then certain things are going to have to adjust around that with regards to my nutritional need and start to address them at the same time that you're planning everything else. That would be my recommendation, but for sure, making sure that the physician, the doctor, is playing a part in this as well, because there are so many different nuances to everyone's individual circumstances. So I can see loads of questions coming through here, and I know what they're about because we had a few sent in as well. It's time that we went there. Magnesium, Ida. The magnesium debate. Okay, take us through, for the benefit of everyone here, take us through our thinking. Why do we do it? Why do we pick it? Why do we think it's great?
It's really quite simple. The reason why we chose to include magnesium in Zinzino is that we wanted to make sure that we have enough magnesium present for each and everyone taking Zinzino in order to absorb and utilize the vitamin D that is present in the product. We don't know if you are deficient or sufficient in magnesium, but we know that magnesium helps the uptake of vitamin D. Vitamin D in itself is a fairly good vitamin to absorb. It's quite easy to absorb it, but we know that magnesium play a role in the absorption of vitamin D. So this product is a Rolls Royce, if you can say it like that, when it comes to the overall aim, and that is to increase or tailorize your vitamin D status. And the reason why we have chosen 4 different sources to magnesium is because we know that different forms of magnesium have different bioavailability. We also know that some magnesium sources are better in some parts of our GI tract, and we wanted to make sure that having a broad spectrum magnesium approach, that we utilize and absorb in the most efficient way. We have chosen the 4 sources to magnesium that we believe is the best sources out there, including magnesium from seawater and magnesium citrate. We have malate and bisglycinate.
Brilliant. Part of the question that goes around that, I'd like to address some of this, is about the timings. And a question's just come in the box saying it's best to take vitamin D of an evening. There's no evidence for that. There's no, I promise you now, as an environmental, as a physiologist, as a chronobiologist, there are papers out there that have investigated this, that have studied it, that have looked at various time and exposures, but there is no compelling evidence or consensus that says taking vitamin D in the evening is the best time. And further to that, often people start to get into this notion of timings of day for magnesium, and that certain magnesiums work better at different times of day. And again, the evidence is really thin. The evidence that is in the weight of that supports that is really thin. In fact, the consensus sits in a recent systematic review. It says what's more important is that you're getting the magnesium. That's the top bit, making sure there's no magnesium deficiency. That's the first and the major tick in the box that you have to achieve. And so address that first. Then this idea of separating them out, this nuanced sense of timing around it, again, the evidence that just doesn't support it. Not really. I'm sure if you trawl through, you'll find one paper that's drawn it. But when you look at the meta-analyses, the systematic review and the consensus, doesn't feature. It doesn't get upheld. And that's what we have to be driven by. There's a lot of research out there in all of these areas. And nutrition is such a hot area for research and investigation that you can literally go down rabbit hole after rabbit hole. What we have to be led by is a decision filter. All of the research and the evidence that we consider has to stack up to certain quality citation indexes, quality indexes, so that we know this is really good, reliable, peer-reviewed information that is either part of a consensus or is informing a consensus, has been through second and third levels of rigor, of systematic review, meta-analysis, so that we can have a faith and an actionable faith that that's why we've done this, that's why it's earned its place in our formulation. And we can't be drawn by the notions of the maybes, because as compelling as they can be, as fascinating as they can be, we can't be too drawn by that. So the key thing is with your vitamin D is make sure you're getting enough each day. And where possible, and we love this from our own brand point of view, is that, you know, because you've got some in Balance Oil, you've got some in Extend, you've got some in Protect, and now we've got Zinzino Shine. Well, there are intervals in your day that you can be taking this in. You know, this naturally divides out. So we're really actually a big fan of that notion that it's not all necessarily in one big hit, and that actually it's spread out across the course of a day. Just make sure that it's there. That's the key part. Make sure that you are addressing the deficiency. So we're heading towards either the conclusion. I think we haven't necessarily addressed every single question, but by themes, we've covered, I would imagine, a lot of people's concerns. And I have been keeping a track, good people, and I've seen some of the questions that are coming in that are about your own values and whether it should be this and this. What I'd like to encourage you to do is think of the key response here. The key response is that we've got this recommended optimal range, and we would encourage you to make fine adjustments to your vitamin D intake to make sure you reach that optimal range, and that you assess that, because it is dynamic and it's going to change across the year and across changes to you. The toxicity is an issue, but you've really got to be consuming high amounts of vitamin D to be in those ranges. Don't do that. Be progressive. Start with those more reasonable amounts and fine tune until you hit that optimal range for you. The guidelines and recommendations are there for exactly that. They are there to give you guidelines and recommendations. And it's based off our very best intentions and our scrutiny of the peer review and the regulations. But ultimately, you're the person who's going to make a decision for you. But we stand by the regulations and the guidelines that we've given. We think that they are going to position people to be more successful about their health and about their nutritional practices that support their health. A question that's just come through, and I'm going to raise this because this happens at a lot of talks that Ida and I do. Someone has asked that what's our personal private opinion of how much somebody should take and what the regulation is. Our personal and private opinion doesn't matter. Our personal and private opinion is irrelevant in the context of the information that we put forward. We believe in the information we put forward. That's why we do it. Our motivation is health. Our motivation, the mission that we're on, our vision is to create a wealth of health in all areas of the world. And so anything we put forward, advice, guidelines, recommendations, product formulation, is solely done to enhance health. And so if we didn't believe in it, you wouldn't be able to access it and read it. That's our guiding light. That's exactly what we're about. So please recognize that we put forward what we believe in. And we know there's a load of noise and information out there that might have a different take on it, but we're confident that adherence, compliance, consistency in your nutrition behaviors is going to bring you great results and better health consistently over the long term. And that's what it's all about. Our approach is never intervention. It's about lifestyle. It's about living better every single day. And that's what we're trying to empower you with the tools to do. So I'm just going to have one last look in the Q&A box, Ida. Mm-hmm. let's have a look. Let's have a look here. So we've got someone. Let's have a look. Again, we can't delve into individual cases really. I should have said that at the start. I do apologize. It's hard to delve into individual cases because we don't have all the information. And so invariably you end up saying the wrong thing. So someone said, here's an interesting one. And we'll maybe we'll finish on this one because this ties into our risk stratification, which is a person who weighs too much. Mm-hmm. So who has it would be defined as overweight or in the obese category, and is having too little vitamin D. Do they need more a day, or will the test results give the exact amount?
So the test result coming back will be as valid for any person independent of weight. But yes, a person carrying more weight will need a little bit more vitamin D than a normal weighted person. There is many different risk factors influencing how much vitamin D we need, how much we're able to utilize, and so on. But yes, body weight is a factor. And there are a little bit differences in the relationship from what we read in the studies. And I've heard everything from 20% more and up. What about you, Colin?
Yeah, that's typically what I see. I think when it comes to that, because it's such a diverse area, so it's almost like a meaningless category. When you say someone is overweight, somebody has obesity, it's kind of that's not a definition in itself, because it doesn't tell you the amount of adiposity or fat. So that's the issue. So again, it comes back to that individual characteristic. But I think consistently across the board, you see the starting point is approximately 20% increase. That's a good starting point. So to factor that increase to begin with, and then make you find adjustments, but for sure. And the reason why I like this as a question comes down to a personal kind of passion of mine, is the factors relating to excessive weight are becoming a huge part of health issues all around the world. And by actually switching people on to thinking about that more, empowering them to be more proactive about managing it, again, that's a way for us to empower better health across societies. And so addressing those specific needs is a key part of that strategy. And there's a ton of literature and research that says, again, for people who are dealing with that and addressing that weight management issue, actually getting into the optimal range vitamin D is mechanistically a part of helping that situation to improve. So I think I've said all I need to say. Have you got any closing remarks that you'd like to finish with, Ida?
There are so many interesting functions of vitamin D and what it does. We could, for example, also talk about vitamin D supplementation and changes in gut microbiota, for example. But I think that our overall aim here is to try to make a correction in the horrible statistics that we see today with 1 billion people vitamin D deficient. We have the tool, both the test and the product, to really go out there and make a difference in life. I hope that you understand that both of these products, the test and the product in itself, the formulation, are easy, elegant, and smart tools for optimizing vitamin D status.
I think that's the perfect way to close it. Absolutely perfect. Thank you, Ida, for your time, your attention, your consideration, and everything you put into this. Everyone here, I would like to thank you for your participation, for taking time out to attend, for your questions, for your interest, for everything you do on the ground level with regards to being catalyst for change for health, wherever you are, in your communities and across our society. And we will return in December. I probably should know the date. If I had an earpiece in now, I would have somebody on the team shouting at me what that date is. But the date will be publicized. It will be confirmed. We will do a final fling before December. So thank you. We look forward to seeing you then. And until then, stay well, stay healthy, stay happy. We'll speak to you soon.